Boa tarde, bem-vindo ao primeiro fórum do IDS em português. Sadly, no, there might be people who don't understand Portuguese, so we'll have to do it in English. But welcome to another IDS seminar. In this one, we're quite lucky because of not just the theme, but the expertise around it. So the title is Becoming Soldiers or Getting By, Young People and the Military in Time of Crisis. And we have Andreza, Aruska, Souza, Santos, who is the director of the King's Brazil Institute, who used to be the director of the Oxford Brazil Institute as well, and works largely on participatory politics, issues of inequality, local government, local governance. And she'll be talking to us about an interesting research that she's conducting on the role of the youth or the motivation of young people, Brazilian young people, to join the military, particularly around the time of multi-crisis, polycrisis in this case, largely to do with COVID. And she'll be presenting to us some of her findings, some of her observations and findings, which is slightly more quantitative. And that's why it's really nice that we have Artur Queiroz Campos Araújo here as the discussant, who is studying similar issues, particularly the lives of military men in Brazil coming from the indigenous groups in the Northwest, so recruits coming from that area, which is kind of slightly more qualitative. And I think that's the beauty here of kind of bringing in different methodologies, different types of data collection, but also analysis dealing with the same issue, similar issue. Why is it interesting? Why is it important? Well, because Brazil, like many other countries in the world, has a military past where you had the military running the country. So like many other countries that had been sadly touched by dictatorship and military dictatorship, there's always this feeling of, in the good old days when the military ruled, and there's that myth of the Weberian bureaucracy kind of military style that is perfect. And it's particularly interesting these days because, well, the military is not running Brazil and possibly might not be running Brazil in the near future, we don't know. But the army men, the big men in the military is now attractive in many other countries around. I mean, if you look at West Africa, the Sahel, you have these discussions with a lot of these right-wings and extreme right-wing political parties in Europe, in North America, in South America, in Central America, in South Asia, and, well, pretty much the whole world. So it's very interesting to kind of get this first-hand data of what's happening in Brazil, what makes young men not just interested in joining the military, but what kind of discourses are there within being in the military in relation to issues of democracy. And I'm going to shut up now and let Andreza speak, and then Artur to be the discussant. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for the very generous and wonderful introduction. I will move to the table so that I can also view my slides while I go through them with you. Thank you. So just to begin, a source of motivation for this work, as Miguel said, the work is quite quantitative, but actually the motivation to do that was very, very much based on qualitative research and living experience in Brazil. So it became more visible in my research about inequalities, and I mainly do ethnography in Brazil, political ethnography, and I have seen a lot of communities in Brazil, especially in the small towns, and it wasn't so frequent that I would see young people talking about joining military careers. There was always a lot of talk about entrepreneurship and businesses and to become public servants. So the realm of careers available to young people in Brazil was not so connected to joining police forces or the military until I realized this was becoming more common in day-to-day conversations. And I approached one other schooler that some of you might know, my colleague Gabriel Feltran, and he also studies peripheries. And I asked him whether he was viewing that, and he said very much so. So I was like, why don't we make a survey and we try to observe if this is happening and there is an increasing likelihood of joining the military or the military police amongst young people in Brazil, and B, what is the motivation if we see that there is a high propensity? And there comes the title of the research, whether people are becoming military, if that's like they perceive the career as something that they want to do, they are recognizing themselves in their career in the sense of becoming, or if they're getting by as, or if this is a more economic choice, and that therefore that's what they're doing. So that is the title of the research: becoming or getting by, youth opportunities in times of economic crisis. Sorry, everything moves a little bit. So we have a web page for our research, which I be happy to share with you, that has the name Becoming or Getting By. Actually, the name of the web page is Becoming Soldiers. So if you Google it, you may find more information where we have our research team, our partners. We have a couple of data ready to share, and lots of interviews and other sources. So the first hypothesis, which has to do with becoming, like whether people are more inclined to join military careers because there is like a greater recognition of the idea that this is a career that they would like to join, this is a career that they feel motivated to join, comes from this. So we see here military personnel assigned to civil positions in the federal government between 2005 and 2020. And you can see that after Bolsonaro's administration and 2018, there is a peak. So it was relatively, I think if I press here, I might get the,
The center one gets the red one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see here that there is like a curve that is ascending, but then with Temer, like in 2016, gets a little bit more steep, but then it stabilizes a bit, and then after Bolsonaro's administration is unheard, like the ascension of and the military in the corridors of power in Brazil. So we thought that this could also motivate young people to join military careers because the career that is more in evidence during Bolsonaro's administration. And our survey was conducted in 2021. And obviously the pandemic, which was also could also be a motivation to join, because during the pandemic, we know that university closure in Brazil was one of the highest in the world, as well as school closure. And young people got like a double punch during the pandemic as well. So the number of closures of employment opportunities was extremely high, or like somehow like the diminishment of working hours available or salaries. There was some room to avoid unemployment, which means like reducing a number of hours or salaries. There was a lot of agreements to keep people in the labor market, but not earning the same. And there was a lot of people who actually were no longer necessary. And of course, there was a lot of people who did work in various forms of informal ways of earnings. And that was massively interrupted during the pandemic, some of these jobs. So one of the questions that we asked was, what is the opinion of young people about the availability of jobs in Brazil? And you can see that, so the question in Portuguese is, and I'm translating to English, in your opinion, the offer of employment for young people in Brazil is very high, medium, low, or very low. There's just no jobs. And most people said that is very low or low, that there are fewer opportunities for young people. And we want to understand that in the context of the pandemic, if this would also lead people to join military careers. And there is a context for this question that also comes from the literature. So countries such as the US, they follow this interest on military careers across many years. So you can go back to the 70s and so on, and you can view like surveys that are they have a historical line, and so you can follow trends, and you can see like in times of economic boom or burst whether careers like as the military tend to thrive or not. And you can also see who view those careers positively. So we know, for example, from the US, that there is a huge connection of joining these careers with like an economic ascension. So usually amongst middle class or lower middle class Americans, they will view this as an opportunity. We know that in the US, the universities, they charge high tuition fees, and also health insurance is also very expensive. So you enter this career as a ladder, so a way to climb up socially and economically. So a lot of people will view that as an opportunity. And we thought, like, will this happen in other economies, such as Brazil, a country that has a military past that is connected to anti-democratic governments? Will this still be an option for young people to join the army to survive an economic downturn, or will people view it more skeptically, or how does it play out amongst young people in Brazil? So that is the context of our research. Was a government that gave a lot of emphasis and economic benefits to military careers, and a time of economic downturn and closure of educational opportunities for Brazilians. So we have a large data set. So we start by looking at the social demographic profile of people, because we know that there can be variations across regions in Brazil and cities. So we check school and career trajectory, we check family background, because this is also a way to look at income. We know that in many countries, if you just ask what is your income, you may get a huge variation that is not always very easy to rely on, because income can vary, especially with informality and precariousness. Particularly in times of COVID, you could have a population that you think is much poorer than they are, or the other way around. But if you look at family backgrounds in terms of education, for example, of mother education, so on, that's a good proxy for income. So we check family background, workability and aspirations, such as what is a good job for you, what do you, what like dreams and aspirations, such as a good life means having a house or ability to travel and so on. So there is a lot of options to workability and aspirations, perceptions of the job market, particularly how the pandemic affects their opportunities, and then perceptions about military career, propensity to join military careers, and conservative views and attitudes. And I can give you some samples of the kind of question. So, for example, in conservative views or attitudes, this follows a pattern of research that asks that, for example, are you against like should people have guns for their own security, or what do you think about the regulation of drugs, or are you pro-abortion, and so on? Just like series of questions common in the sociological literature to measure conservative views and attitudes. So here we go to the results, which I already opened here in our dashboard. I think should be here. Let me just reload. Okay. Can you view it well? So here we can check by gender. There is a small variation. Let me just move this a little screen. Okay, I think the screen share is paused. Although. Thank you. Thank you. So another thing that I forgot to explain is that we check the armed forces for military careers, which is the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, and also the military police. Those are fairly different things because the armed force is nationwide, while the military police is controlled by each state. So obviously, joining a military police in Rio will be different than joining one in Brasilia, for example. But we still had to do that, although it's not fully comparable. That is also a military career, or arguably a very strong opportunity for young people in the question we had in our minds. So so you can see that there is a higher propensity to join the armed forces than the police. And I will enter more in detail into why the armed forces are more positively viewed as a potential career than the police. I can actually explain this now. Our idea here, especially because we saw that the military police was an option that was more, how can I say, viewed as an option for people of lower economic background. So the middle class saw the armed forces as a possibility, but not the police. And it's quite easy to explain that because military careers in Brazil, they don't necessarily imply a risk, a life-threatening possibility, while police forces, like conflicts within Brazil, will be much more visible, noticeable than border issues that the army may deal with. But the police actually is an option that is quite dangerous. So this was viewed as an option for fewer people, and usually those who view the military police as an option had lower educational background, family had lower educational background, so lower income in general, while people who viewed the army was not necessarily of the lower strata, and was in general more positively viewed. And in general also males more than females saw that as an opportunity. We also checked by race, and non-white Brazilians are more propense to join. Age-wise, we had our age group between 16 and 26 years old, because most entrants, like for starter careers, and there are different names, soldiers and cabo and so on, they will cover until like usually 25 years old. By the end of the 25th anniversary is usually, and starting sometimes around 16. The police, however, usually recruit until sometimes 30 or 35. But then if we go up to that point, we exclude a lot of people who can join the army. So we had two limits on the lower level to include most opening positions for military careers in Brazil. And there is not a significant variation across the age board. There is a very similar propensity. Region-wise, we saw the North Sea, like we could see a little bit of variation where wealthier regions in Brazil have slightly lower propensity. Rural versus urban, there is a huge difference, but I think that also has to do with our sample. Like Brazil is mainly an urban region, so this was expected somehow. In terms of occupation, because of the age group, the majority of them were students or self-employed or no occupation and so on. So a very expected kind of career prospect for the age group in Brazil. In terms of religion, here is going to gets more interesting as well, that we can see that Christian religions have a higher propensity than other religions in Brazil. Now, the majority of Brazilians will like be evangelical or Catholic, or we call the Pentecostal with the more traditional evangelical that are like this appears in the literature a little bit, but the main thing here is that we are going to discuss this soon enough, but we also want to understand more, and perhaps we're left here with a few questions as well about the relationship between religion and military careers. So there are different discussions in the literature. Some will point out how similar hierarchies can happen in the two fields, like military careers and the church, evangelical church, idealization of patriotism, male roles in society, and so on, that you can see in some of these occupational territories as well as in the church. Another issue is that, and that came when we did some focus group interviews with people who are in the army before we started the questionnaire. So we interviewed some people to just understand a little bit better the career. And a lot of people said that there is a lot of space for religious faith. So sometimes there will be cultus or church groups or so on, but hardly ever anyone will be from non-traditional Christian faith. So very little space for people who are, let's say, from the candomblé or something like that to self-declare and engage in their faith. And the very, very best, some people will be spiritas, and the majority of the opportunities for religion kind of congregation and gathering will be related to Catholicism or evangelical practice. And here another point of discussion is that people self-select these careers as well based on their perceptions of themselves and their occupation. So for example, a young person who is from a non-Christian faith or who is not heteronormative may already think that this could be an option in times of crisis, but not for me. And they may retrieve from that sort of opportunity, while people who think they fit, they are more likely to say how propense they are. So end up having this kind of situation where religion end up creating higher propensity of joining. And then further schooling, which we examine to also check a proxy for social background. So you can see that that when there is like high education, there is still quite a good propensity, especially to join the army than the police. So you can see that lower education, like, is more positive correlated to police propensity than the armed forces. But mother schooling becomes kind of slightly more relevant just because of the context of the formation of Brazilian families that is a lot led by mothers than both parents. And it's the same. So if the mother has good education, then it's still very propense to join the army, but lower education is more related to joining the police. And then there is the need not in education or employment, which in Brazil, how is it called again? Nem. Exactly. So quite negative correlated to either of them, but we are still trying to understand a little bit more of how these people perceive the job opportunities. There is some regression models here that people can check also about the conservative index. We will talk a little bit more about that, but in general, what we saw is that conservative also positively relates to the possibility of joining. So there is an economic trajectory that it needs to be well understood in terms of lack of opportunities for young people, perception of the job markets, perception of how the COVID impact their ability to find a job, and all of that, making them more likely to join these careers. Both the police and the army, with poorer people looking more positively at the police, but also the more conservative young people are, also the more likely they will be to find a place in those careers for both the military police and the army. We also checked, like we had a few qualitative questions about why people join those careers. So we did, like, we got a sense of the words that appeared in their answers. And so propensity to join the armed forces, for example, a lot of them saw like a greater interest in the career, actually. So economic stability came quite often, but there was also an idea of they like the profession, they like it, they admire it, they view the work as good, like bom, boa, dream, vida. There was a lot of things that came up that there are facilities in the career in terms of accessing from lunch and food and like the day-to-day, but also long-term benefits in health, schooling for the children, the military schools, which are perceived as with a very good quality, and so on and so forth. So things came, there are quite of positive ideas. While when we saw the police, there was like idea of risk or danger, like lack of work and so on, came a little bit more than that. So we can see that the police was a more of a sort of economic driver rather than admiration in comparison to the armed forces. And then in the difficulty of finding a job in Brazil, the issue of experience was very strong. Like young people really perceiving the job market as very difficult for them to join. And I don't know if we show here, but one of the questions that we had in our data set is how the COVID impact our chance of finding a job. And the vast majority of people said that it had a huge impact on them. And the greater, like, how can I say, the more negative they viewed the effects of the pandemic, the more likely they were to say that they would be propense to find a career in the military, like in the armed force or the police. So the perception of the pandemic also plays a very big role. So here we describe a little bit more of the project in our dashboard. And I think another thing that is, I don't know if I'm running out of time, but just to, okay, 9 minutes left. I'm almost done anyways. So another thing that I want to say is that besides this of understanding the impact of COVID and the impact of Bolsonaro's administrations on young people, also came like when we were interpreting the data, like what do we do with this such high propensity of 40% of people saying that yes, they would be propense to find a career in those areas. Obviously, being propense to saying that you're likely to join or they're admired doesn't mean that we will materialize that, but like still is a perception of the job market and a perception of careers that we were viewing there. And we were like, how do we assess that in a context of people that is highly connected, that's hyper connected, that is, making Instagram a job opportunity? This feels as if we are talking about two extremes. We have extremely precarious and liberal and freedom sort of job market in Brazil, where people have some work and income, but they don't necessarily have a job. And then you have this kind of hyper hierarchical job structure also calling the attention of young people. So how do we interpret these two extremes. So this is also something that we are putting a lot of attention now. And here we don't think those are two very different things, but perhaps two sides of the same coin. So precarization and lack of good job opportunities for young people is lead them to have those options, which can be trying to find job on day-to-day platforms, which can be Uber and other sorts of platforms to find money, but can also be, like selling yourself on the social medias, TikTok, Instagram, and so on, and trying to find an income by being a coach or like finding your public and your crowd. But that's not necessarily a dream, but a way also to get by. And when we ask people in terms of their aspirations and dreams, a lot of them showed, how can I say, a more traditional view of life. So yes, we asked young people about their aspirations, and a lot of things that came up, we thought it would be like travel the world and know different countries. But first and foremost was like buying a house and having a family. So you see that there are traditional dreams and values in society that are not necessarily finding an answer in the job market. So we know that to have access to a house, you need to have access to mortgages, you need to have access to the banking system, and for that you need a more reliable income. So that dream is more easily accomplished if you are in careers that are more stable. So we saw that the issue of stabilidade, like find job stability, very strong in this aspiration to correspond to some of these traditional dreams and values that the young people have. So whether they'll find a solution on digital platforms and more precarious jobs positions, it's also like a search for the same stable dreams, but like a lack of opportunity to find it otherwise. So they throw themselves there. So in general, what we reveal is that the world, the economic possibilities for young people is in general limited, especially during the pandemic. There are fewer opening positions, fewer job opportunities. Universities were closed for a very long time, as well as the schools. People were like in general lack of hope. So if they throw themselves in these extreme precarious platforms or looking for this opposite side, which is this very hierarchical and stable careers, but in the end, they're in search of the same thing, which is a better life with more money and more stability. Now, and here comes also a bigger thought, which is how then in the end this precarization leads to political radicalization. So one stream of social science is studying how like the precarization will lead you to increase radicalization because of the nature of precarious work and how these people are being driven into a more far-right politics. But another way to view that is also this, like how the lack of opening positions may lead you to careers that are in countries like Brazil more associated to authoritarian ruling and right identification. So this is not to say that the army is necessarily always going that direction, but historically, yes, and also the career has an association and an occupational kind of socialization that leads to this idea of strong man, unitary family systems, and heteronormative views that have been also highly used by the far right. So I think this some of these results also call to think about just youth policies and how can we think about the labor market for young people. Now I will maybe go back to my slides. So I will let my colleagues share the screen again for people who are watching from the computer. So I think I already discussed some of the conclusions. And this is just my name for those who are watching don't know me yet. And as I said, a lot of The discussion that appear will be in our webpage and in our dashboard. So if you have more questions or anything, you can get in touch, and I'll be more than happy to hear your comments and questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreza. I'll just pass it straight to
Thank you, Andreza, for this lovely presentation. Very interesting, the data that you're sharing with us today. And it got me thinking of many things that do connect with my research. So I maybe should take some time to explain what my research is on, just to draw out a bit of the differences as well. And then we can go on to discussing the data that you shared. So I'm doing my PhD in social anthropology, so I was approaching the issue of militarization in Brazil as well, but through a different perspective altogether, which my main focus is trying to understand particularly, which is something that I saw that there was a bit of the data there on your presentation, which is the incorporation of indigenous men into the military, particularly. In a specific part of the Brazilian Amazon, which is the northwestern Brazilian Amazon, in a city called São Gabriel da Cachoeira, which is located on the border, the Brazilian border with Venezuela and Colombia. The idea was to understand both how the military, the army in this case particularly, understood these indigenous men or understands indigeneity in Brazil altogether, through the incorporation of these men, and also how these indigenous groups are understanding their participation on the Brazilian state, and particularly in the Brazilian army. So I did 12 months of participant observation in São Gabriel da Cachoeira, where I was trying to be as involved as possible in, these military facilities. There are a lot of military facilities in São Gabriel da Cachoeira. There are a lot of military facilities in the Brazilian Amazon. And this has been growing for quite some time, at least for the last 40, 30 years or so. But it is quite curious that when I was doing my literature review for this research, I wasn't seeing any research or very not a lot of research on militarization of the Amazon, specifically within anthropology. And so I started to ask myself why. When I was talking to generals before going to the field, they were telling me that the military is very much present in the Amazon. They were very proud about this role, as if the Amazon was the mission purpose of the military of the 21st century. Considering many things, considering that there are international pressures on Brazil to protect the Amazon, there are international pressures on Brazil to protect its indigenous peoples as well. And when I got to São Gabriel, I was able to understand that the military, or at least the highest ranked military officer in São Gabriel, is, in some instances, has even more power than the mayor itself. So I was trying to understand these two perspectives coming together, both the indigenous and the military. And what was curious is that the title of your research, Becoming Soldiers or Getting By, speaks a lot to the data that I found, because as if I was expecting a more, let's say, connection with the symbols, the narratives, the morale of being in the military from the indigenous, as if there was some sort of transformation occurring. I was taken aback when I found out that the participants that I talked to, my interlocutors, indigenous interlocutors, they were saying, "No, we we are trying to find, a steady source of income, or we're trying to understand the military in a way that we can exercise a certain platform with our own communities to talk to the military if we need, steady sources of fresh water. How do we talk to a state institution when we require any sort of state investment or steady source of help? Or how broader, in a broader sense, how do we talk to or speak to this white man's world? But when it came to the military, which is sometimes portrayed as a modern institution, a pragmatic institution, they were portraying themselves rather with these values, with these morals, stating that, yes, we have a mission here. Most of these high-ranking officers come from wealthy cities like Rio or São Paulo or Brasilia. And another interesting distinction is that these indigenous men, they do not get into the military to have careers, right? They go on to be not permanent soldiers, but temporary soldiers. They can only serve for 7 years. And they sometimes don't even want to be soldiers. But by Brazilian law, once they become conscripts, they are under the risk of serving. So yes, there are instances that some of these men wanted to serve, and sometimes these issues are related to, oh yes, because my father served the military, and yes, my uncle served the military, my cousin served the military, so that was seen as positive. But they mostly relate their experience to a pragmatic form, which within the indigenous relationship with modern world is connected to survival. It's a type of pragmatic survival. Yes, we have to occupy or at least experience and take advantage of what the state can grant to us. So that was my research. And what I found interesting is the distinction that you end up doing between military police in Brazil and the armed forces. That was a question that I had. But at some times in Brazil, I feel as well that they are also intertwined. When you showed the graph on the increased militarization, at least within public office, within the state, it's interesting because it's pretty well connected with militarized operations in urban contexts in Brazil as well. So if you think about pacifications in the favelas of Rio, if you think of the how militarized these grand events that happened in Brazil in the last decade as well, the World Cup and the Olympics, how well militarized they were. Well, now in the G20 summit, Rio is becoming a militarized city once again with these operations of law and order. And this is connected to anthropological literature on the military as well, because the critique is we have a history and a legacy in Brazil of military government or dictatorship and so on. But why do we study the military only when this happens? Why do we study the military when the military is in government, and we don't study the process, so on, the everyday lives of these military professionals? And I think a very good finding that you have is that you're trying to understand what makes them join, right? And I think this is connected to sort of like the how when do we go from stability, democratic stability, to authoritarianism, in a sense. What explains that is precarity, one of the main variables. So I think this is a good time to study the military or military worlds. So one question that I have is you presented data on schooling by parents, either mothers or fathers. And I was curious to know if there were issues on family background connections to the military as well. And the more direct questions are were these fathers, part of the military as well? Because the concept of the family for the military, or what I found, is that it's really extremely relevant. Like you demonstrated, the military, the army, the career as an army officer is a career that you are constantly being shifted from different geographies in Brazil. You can either start in the south, and then 2 years after, you're in the north of the country. And because these professionals, these career officers, they have traditional values, most often they have families as well, and their families go with them along this career. So they are part of this military world, even if they're not formally within that environment. Obviously, they are, because they can get the benefits of the career as well. So this idea of the family seems to be really, for me, it seems to be really central. So if there was something on the data that talks about, the family background. And let me see if I have any. And it's something that I also found really interesting is that this distinction, there's a class distinction between choosing, not choosing, but in more likeliness to join the military police, and whilst you're middle class, you choose the armed forces. And because this is something that I found as well when talking to these former indigenous soldiers, they would say sometimes really positively about their experience in the military, saying, yes, if I could stay longer, I would. If I could make a career out of this, I would. Why doesn't the military has affirmative action programs for the career? And then there was a visit by former Vice President General Mourão in São Gabriel. He was a commander of the brigade. And then he was confronted by the indigenous movement, by Foirne, the leader, saying, yes, but now it's time for the army to create affirmative action programs for young indigenous men to join the military academy, AMA. And Mourão replied, well, if they're good enough, they won't need affirmative action. The usual argument against affirmative action programs. And if within Brazil, these programs have become most likely universalized, why not hasn't it arrived in the military? Or, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. So yeah, if you could talk a bit more about this idea of the family, and if there is any data on the family background, that would be great. And yeah, thanks again for this lovely presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arthur. Should I get back to his questions, or you want to get it around? Yeah.
Do you mind if...
This was so rich, your explanation, because a lot of people were asking us, why did we find quite a high propensity among indigenous people? And what you answer about the militarization of those territories is very much the answer that we had for this, but to have an ethnography that viewed that, and indigenous groups that perceive the needs for quota system and who wants to stay in the career, this is very, very rich. What you talk about class and separation, this is actually something that surprised me a little bit, because I thought, okay, if you are a non-white and poor Brazilian, although the police may be a good option for you, your experience with them may also be incredibly negative, usually viewed as a potential criminal, a target for state violence, and so on. But it was again ethnography that revealed why this can be quite an option for those groups. And there is an interesting ethnography that we studied the military police in Rio, and interviewing one Black Brazilian policeman in Rio, he was like, here I'm not Black, I'm not white, we are all blue. And this idea of inclusion and the socialization that comes with the career and so on. So obviously we cannot generalize such experiences, but we are getting answers about these careers amongst indigenous groups or amongst poor Brazilians that is nuances a lot of some of the understandings that we have about the perception of the state and the perceptions of inclusion and economic opportunities that those careers will offer for people who otherwise struggle in Brazilian society. About family influence, this came out very easily, like when we were doing kind of a focus group to then create the question. Everybody said that this is a career that passes on in the families, and it does. Like a lot of there is a very important family aspect, but this is also in transformation, let's say. So you're exposed to military careers because your uncle, your father, and so on was, but there is now, as with many other things, influencers as well in those careers. So there is now profiles that are very visited by policemen, by people with guns, this idea of uniform and what it creates that can be quite influential. So we asked who kind of influenced young people in the career choice. So families is a big factor, especially in this kind of career, but the internet was also a very big factor, as well as some religious leaders, like other people than the family. So different kinds of influence, but I believe that if we had not looked at propensity, but we look at who actually will join, like concretize this aspiration, then I think the family factor would be much stronger. But that's a different research. Also, when you talk about like the lack of studies of, for example, on the militarization of the Amazon or the drivers for the career, that's a historical gap that we're trying to fill. Understanding the propensity to join the career, how people perceive this career in Brazil is very important. It's very important across different governments. It's very important across different economic cycles. And that's why we are going to repeat this survey. So for those who are interested, we are repeating the survey next year. And we have now a different administration than a Bolsonaro government that tends to be quite like the opposite of a lot of things that Bolsonaro was trying to be, and also a different economical momentum than during the pandemic. So let's see what changed and what remains when we run this survey again, and hopefully we'll run it every 4 years to build this historical series that exists in other countries, but is, to my knowledge, not so common, or even we didn't find something similar to ours in the context of Brazil. But hopefully I answered some of your questions, and I'm open to more.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to open to the audience in person. We've got a couple of questions online already as well, but I'll open to people in the audience here. Anyone wants to ask a question or comment? Really? Don't be shy. Free. I'm waiting. No, there you go. Thank you. So we have a silent rule of women first. So,
okay, thank you, Andreza. My question is mainly in methods, because I am developing a method with children and young people. So I want to ask you about the ethics and this risk that you have in your during your work and the survey, and if you can share this, how you manage and go through this ethics thing in your methods. Thank you.
Mhm.
Do you want to answer or
To decide.
entirely up to you?
I can answer that one before getting the second one. So nightmare, obviously, like ethical clearance, especially because there were minors, like 16 to 18. Usually when you deal with people under the age of 18, the ethical procedures are much stricter. And in our case, I think it was mainly possible because people above the age of 16, they can already vote in Brazil. There are several things that understand them as competent adults. We had a series of questions that we perceived that could put people at risk. For example, if they were answering with their parents. So for a lot of questions, we put prefer not to answer. So for example, in terms of gender identification and so on. So there was always those options that they could say prefer not to answer. They could also exit the questionnaire at any time. Because it was the pandemic, we didn't do in-person questionnaires. We did through by online platforms. So they would answer the questionnaire online, and it was a questionnaire that could be opened on the phone, like a very adaptable format to different means of digitalization. We also try to make it as quick as possible to think about their internet facilities and in a format that doesn't require a lot of data usage. Making it online also excludes a lot of people, and that's why the questionnaire wasn't like something that was like a 3-day or something. It was more like 3 weeks running to fill the quotas that we had to be representative and have a confidence interval of above 95%. Because of also the age group makes doing such questionnaires online like more possible. I think we were trying to have a view of society at large, including all like the elderly and so on, then using an online questionnaire would be a lot more difficult, and we'd potentially not have a very good confidence interval. But this age group is even in areas like we know that some people are more connected than others, but in this age group you can reach quite well. So we managed to fill all the quotas. But yeah, like it is a difficult word to navigate, but I think with lots of back and forth with ethical committees, maybe I think there were 3 or 4 rounds actually. It took more or less half a year to get the ethics for this research approved. But it was a very interesting learning experience as well on conducting interviews with young people.
Thanks. I'm just going to pass it on to Evan.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, thanks for both of you. I don't fully understand the Brazilian context in terms of conscription, in terms of the fact that kind of you have to get out of, officially you have to get out of being the military. So I was just wondering how that kind of relates to how people are, relating to the idea of a career and that you have to get out of it, and then how that might cross cut with kind of class, and then specifically with the military police as an option as well. Is it that if you join the military police, that gets you out of? Is it what's the relationship for conscription with the military police? Is it a separate thing to get you out of it? How does that cross cut with class?
You mean like like the compulsory service and this sort of. Yeah, so we excluded actually people who were serving, like that or were already military, and that was one of the first questions, because we wanted to have the view of people who are not in the military, how they perceive it. So it's, I don't think I can cover all the different ways of joining a military career in Brazil, because there are so many entry points. Like you can enter to be a doctor, for example, for the military, you can enter to be an engineer or a teacher, like there are different academies and so on. But the most, besides the service that some Brazilians will do, the main entry point is those entry points between usually the age of 16 and 25, where there are like concursos, like exams, and you can subscribe. There are like preparatory courses and so on, and then you enter like in these entry points for the career. They will have different names for the different armed forces, which is the same with the police. So you're not compulsory joiner or anything like that. You will subscribe to do an examination, and then you have a age structure that allows you to enter. So those were the entry points that we are interested, which are the most common ones. I think Artu is the expert person here, because he actually entered the career.
So basically, there are in the army, particularly, there are 3 different forms of entry. 4. Yeah, 4. So the one that I did, because I served the military, is the compulsory form, which is under Brazilian law of military service. Every Brazilian man, on the year they turn 18, they have to go to a military junta, and this can be done online now. They provide them with their documents and say, yeah, I'm a Brazilian-born man. This is the year I turned 18. Here are my documents. And they go to sort of like a large data set, which, depending on the geographical place where they registered, they would be more likely or less likely to serve. So they would go through a series of, interviews and conversations. And what happens is, and most of the times, is that people that don't want to serve won't serve. People that want to serve have to prove themselves to their interviewers that they are capable. But, and on an ultimate level, the discretionary power of deciding who serves or not belongs to the military. They have that form of power. There is the only way, but when you enter through this entry point, you can only serve for 7 years, and you start as a recruit. If you stay for a year, you become a soldier, and then you can go up to corporal or sergeant. You don't rise above the rank and file. There is a second entry point, which is you go to the sergeant school, which you can make a career out of this. You on this military service entry point, you won't get any of the career benefits, so you won't have the very nice pensions that military career has to offer in Brazil. On the sergeant school, you'll get all of these benefits, but you can only go up to a certain point, only to lieutenant. Then you have the official career, which is the military academy, which is where you can go up to general, if you are, if you are able to. And then, like Andreza was saying, if you already have a degree, you are either a doctor or you are a historian or a librarian, you can go through a supplementary school, which will be placed up into the role of colonel. So the forms of entry are representative of the hierarchical structure of the military as well. And I think there's a class distinction, class, ethnic, or different distinctions there as well. Women are able to join the military as well in Brazil, but only on specific roles. And as far as I understand, only through the sort of like career path as well.
More questions besides Alex, who's dying to ask several questions? Okay, I'll pass it on to Alex.
My lad too. Thank you. That's really incredibly important research and really interesting. And thanks, Artur, also for sharing those situated perspectives from São Gabriel, which is a fascinating region. So I wanted to ask about the future. I'm going to look forward, given that you're going to do another round. And actually, specifically, I want to look even further forward towards a hypothetical return of far-right government in Brazil in 2026-7. Because it seems to me that you're producing amazing insights into the demand side, but we do need to look at the supply side, right? Brazil's military is incredibly expensive. The pension apparatus and all of the associated benefits are incredibly expensive. We know that the far right in Brazil, and we saw this in Bolsonaro's government with Guedes and Bolsonaro, essentially the two poles are a military corporatist, recruit our people and look after them wing, and a hard neoliberal, shrink the state wing. So the question is, to what extent is there a risk that the Brazilian military is making a promise it won't be able to keep, and that may become politically explosive in a hard right government context where their promise is presumably be part of what's offered as the social bargain to get back into power, because Brazil's economy cannot sustain keeping the promises that in a context of accelerating precarity, where working class men are not seeing any routes into formal employment and that are capable of fulfilling those traditional aspirations of forming a family, building a house, essentially exiting what the Mozambican anthropologist Elisson calls waithood, being stuck permanently in adolescence because you can't form a household, which is what economic precarity does to you and life as a delivery driver does to you. And if you want to get out of that via the army, but the army is promising that for all, indigenous, Afro-descendant, white, elite, non-elite, and yet we know it can't fulfill that promise. What are the political implications of that? In other words, if the army becomes one of the small islands of stable employment with a future and access to a pension in an increasingly precarized economy, how does that play out in terms of the wider politics and the political narratives and imaginaries that are going to be at stake in the campaign over Lula's succession? Do I get to ask my other one or not? My other one's even bigger. Okay, 8th of January 2023, the military did not come out en masse to support the coup attempt. One of the reasons was that the White House put in a phone call to the generals and said, don't do it. We're going to have a different White House. What's your reading of the propensity for more direct military engagement in the governance of Brazil with Trump in the White House?
Easy. Oh my God. First of all, I love this idea of waithood, this concept. So I want to read more about this scholar that you mentioned, Mozambique. What's the name?
Mm-hmm. Writes about Mozambique, Tunisia. It's a really interesting book. About the impossibility of becoming adult in today's economy.
Very, very. I will get this reference from you. Well, Alex, we have another graph that I didn't show, but it's the ascension of the military and elective mandates. So we have a lot more people being elected as politicians that have a military background. I guess these might offer some insights into what the priorities in Brazilian economy will be. So the Brazilian economy, as you have said, they can't make their promises. It's a very expensive career, but they can't prioritize still their career at the cost of other priorities. So it might be something that we see with if we know that the orçamento, like the budget, is again a political decision, and with so many elected politicians, like with this background, then we might see a budget priority in that area. When we think about redemocratization in Brazil, this was actually a discussion that greater political competition may decrease the force of military careers or the military structure, like if we think of Wendy Hunter and so on. what this kind of post-military dictatorship political analysis did not consider is that it saw the democratic kind of political game as a non-militarized political game. So it was the military versus the parties and the politics. Now we have the military in the party and the politics. So it's slightly different. So we can see a strong electoral, dispute and political parties and so on that is still favor militarization and so on, because it's not two things. The 8th of January 2023 and the role of a different White House, I don't think my research answers that question, and I'd approach it cautiously because I did not study the military force or the military ranks or people who are in the army thinking, but really I'm approaching this from a more political economy interest on, whether people are becoming or getting by in this sort of careers, rather than really understanding so well the political influence of the military and so on. So I really do not have an answer to you, but if we keep seeing an increased militarization of politics, an increased propensity to join the career, either for values or for economic reasons, then we see something like this happening and the military join because maybe Casablanca is stopping it, and then what is going to be the response of society, or how they will understand this, maybe less resistant and so on. So I guess it's as a tipping point if we think about radicalization, if we think about precarization, if you think about what this means for democracy. So unfortunately, I don't have the answer, but I'm also not very optimistic.
More questions? I have a couple of them if people are... No? Okay. I have a few of them, my own, but I'm just going to start with questions from the internet, which is largely around values. So there's an interesting one here, like to Andreza, which is, can you identify on your research which people within your survey, within your respondents, which people were looking for more than stability? Is there a profile or profiles of people that, so for instance, to give an example, like looking for entering or joining a more trustful or institution?
Mm-hmm. I think when we opened the data set, because they did that we published this, we explored some variables, but I think there is a lot of crossing points that people can do. So, for example, being from the countryside, being a white, being pro-guns and entering the military and so on. So we can find this sort of profiles and values which people are looking for more than stability. So there is a lot of crossing variables that I think different users of the data set will be able to do. But in general, I would say that there is an overlap also in this propensity, like the economic variable is very strong, as we saw, especially to join the police, but also the more value-oriented career choice is also there. So it's not either or, like there is a correlation of facts that economy plays a role, but also positively viewing the career as well, especially when it regards to the army. Oh, sorry, the armed force. I keep saying the army.
Yeah, I know, army and armed forces, that's true.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of questions. So basically, what I'm thinking is, A, I would like to do this research, but B, if I was doing this research, what else would I be looking for or engaging with? And so there's a couple of bits there. One of them I was thinking was kind of bringing more class and race into the discussion. Because I'm thinking, two things. One, where is race to a certain extent, but also there's a lot of the armed forces anywhere in the world are kind of, they always have this myth of being very Weberian, like, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, what's your color, where you're coming from, you're going to be a soldier or something. So I was wondering to what extent the thinking of your respondents in terms of, would they see the armed forces as, let's say, less racist or less, I wouldn't say sexist, but less classist, less racist? Would that appear in their kind of aspirations, in their thoughts of what the armed forces are? That was one thing that I thought would be interesting to take on. The other one, there's a whole literature on desmonte, let me say it in English, the disassemblage, right? So this was a Bolsonaro regime project of disassembling the civil service, the bureaucracy. And you can actually see Republica has this really interesting study on how just after COVID or just around COVID, the number of civil servants is decreasing drastically across the country, at federal level, but even state and municipality. And then it picks up clearly because you need the bureaucrats to kind of help you with COVID. And there's a whole literature. So there's Alexandre Gomide and a bunch of other people at IPEA, Michel Moraes Sais Silva, Gabriela Lota, Flavia Schmidt, who now went back to the Esplanada, but she was in IPEA and in NAP for a while, has a couple of very interesting studies of studying the militarization of the bureaucracy during Bolsonaro. And I think it's very interesting because she separates in two types. There's the increase of the military, how do you say, inside the headquarters, dentro do quartel. Like there's an increase of army people, armed forces, and see, it's tricky.
It is true.
And there's also an increase of bringing in the armed forces, bringing in officers and this is for me, one of the most cleverest things Bolsonaro did, which is, wait a minute, army officers are civil servants. Why aren't they not coming into the cargos comissariados? You know, let them be the proper gestores, the managers. So there's this replacement of the career bureaucrats by military career bureaucrats in a lot of these positions. And Flavia Schmidt does a very interesting study on why do they do that? Why would they stay there? Because a lot of times army people like to do army stuff. They don't want to run countries. There was money involved as well. I think the salaries are really good. And that's the other thing. Like you notice that over time, salaries for some parts of the military don't increase that much. It's more the cargos, it's more the officer salaries that are increasing and making the armed forces expensive. And to what extent your respondents, how aware are they of these kind of the nuances within the armed forces of who, the four types and all of these things? I thought it'd be very interesting. And again, connecting to that disassembling of the state machinery literature, which I think is very interesting. The other two other bits, and you don't have to answer, just like things that I would do research on, is, and you touched on this, which is the whole black on blue, blue on black discussion. And there's a lot of literature within the police in the US, right? What you call I wrote it down just in case, the organizational socialization, which is, I'm not black, I'm blue, right? I am in the police and I behave like a police officer. And it's interesting, there were some studies during Tony Blair's government in the UK where actually the opposite was happening, which was the black on blue, which was, I remember there was this interesting study in Wales where the increase of non-white police officers made the stop and search operations much more democratic in terms of color. It wasn't just the usual suspects that were being stopped. And I was wondering this black on blue, blue on black discussions and what's happening both within the police, the military police, but also within the armed forces. I think that would be really interesting to kind of dig deeper. And then just one tiny little thing. You said on your survey, if someone says, well, I'm serving in the armed forces, you say, well, we don't use that data. But did you collect it? Nice comparison. I was curious on that.
No, it was a closing point for it.
So yes, I mean, these points and questions are for the two of you, since this is what you make a living these days on. I think it's lots of interesting stuff. I'll let you.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. Well, let me see, where do I begin? Desmonte dos serviços públicos. I think I will start from here. And you mentioned the important research by Gabriela Lota, amongst many others, that were talking about not only the dismantling of this structure, but also the persecution of public servants while during Bolsonaro's administration. And there was also increasing salaries amongst the military. And that's why that was one of the motivations to study that, because other careers were in decline. There were no entry points, or there were persecution. There was a lot of negative publicity on public servants, but those public servants, the military, were like positively portrayed, as essential workers, as doing work for Brazil, particularly during the pandemic, but also you mentioned GLO, like the guarantee of law and order in countries and so on. So it started with Temer again, huge promotion during Bolsonaro's administration, and then you have the pandemic on top of that closed a lot of opportunities. So that, of course, increases this idea, the militarization of the bureaucracy and the visibility of this position beyond those who were exposed to that through family, but it just became a lot more known to people as, I actually have that option. How do people view all these different entry points, or how they study the career? I guess this is a very important aspect. And in countries that study that very much, like the US, you have this different kind of research. You have some that look more similar to what we did: propensity, likelihood to join, entry points in the market, kind of vocation, career aspirations, and so on. And you have those people who will have this long study with the same people. So you get like 100 respondees and you follow them through, let's say, 10, 15 years. This kind of research is always amazing and very hard to do. And then you see from those who said they are likely to join, who then actually joined. And then you see, for example, the aspects of family being very strong. Like propensity is positively correlated to actual enlisting. So people who say they are more propense, there is a great chance that they will then enter rather than people who say I'm not interested at all, and then they change their mind and then they enter. So research shows that. Also length of staying. So if they enter more because of economic opportunities, they are more likely to stay shorter periods of time than if they have a value identification and so on. But this is not the research we did. But this is so far, this is a research that I think is very interesting in doing this kind of research. So a lot of the time when I present this work, and this is still an ongoing process, people ask that, but how many people actually join and so on. So for those who have this kind of questions, all I can direct them to see is that the number of people in the cursinhos preparatórios and the preparatory course and so on is increasing. So there is an idea that this is not like how positively they view, but actually there is a drive into joining these concursos. Another colleague who is part of the military told me also that there is a lot more people failing some of the physical exams, like because you need to have a certain physical condition to join. And his interpretation of that before there would be like a typical idea of trying, like you try if you can, and you're likely to join and so on. But now there is more desperation. People may not necessarily fit, but they still try. So there is more people failing because there is more people trying. So there are other studies looking into that. So I think, but this is like who are actually joining, how much do they know about the career? I think those are all very important questions, but I think it's important to separate a little bit the research, because this is also an understanding of the job market, an understanding of the ambitions and aspirations of young people, and reading a much bigger context, and not so in depth. Now, the occupational socialization is also research to be done then to people who entered. Again, you said it, how this is a public career, and I think this should also be open to the public. What is the content on military academies? What are people reading? What are they studying? How is the socialization aspect? Who is there? Why? Like, who has access to this data, and how can we you understand this? There is a strong socialization aspect. There is a strong occupational socialization. There is a strong identification. There is that I think needs to be better understood. So, as you said, that non-white police officers in the UK change the kind of profiling of people who will be targeted by the police. Another very important work is Monique Marx is studying post-apartheid police in South Africa, and how like Black policemen rather than white police force targeting Black South Africans will change this aspect, and so on, like studying the police from within and the armed force. There will be some studies like that, but I think we need a lot more to understand these aspects of socialization, of careers, and it's still viewed quite as a difficult place to navigate, to get interviews. I guess you said that your entry points that you served yourself, so you were from within. I think most of the work we see is former policemen who then write ethnographies and so on, and it doesn't is not known for its openness in terms of content, but I think it should be more open, because I think there are very important aspects that we can understand, and I don't think there is here a sort of investigation from a kind of accusatory position, like, oh, socialization and creates non-democratic force or something like that, but we are actually seeing quite a more nuanced picture. It creates opportunities, it de-racialize some relationships. So there are many aspects that could be actually highlighted positively, but I think there is such a separation, like the university being like such a democratic, progressive sphere, that will point the finger at this conservatory and historically non-democratic organizations that put them apart, words apart. But I think there are complexities that we are viewing here that need to be much better understood if you want to be fair to all sides, and especially to young people at large. But I'll let you also have a chance.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So there was a question on class and race, and what does the army represent on that regard? And I think that connects with the whole aspect of militarization as a whole, or this project of militarizing government, which before that did this idea of disassemblage. And this is something I myself have been struggling with, of defining what militarization is. This is just the more revenue that comes from the Ministry of Defense. Is it just we're putting on the chairs officers, or is these forms of socialization, militarized socialization, what militarization truly is? And within the Brazilian literature on the anthropology of the military, there are several key points that speak to these issues. One of them is from Celso Castro from FGV. He did one of the first ethnographies within a military institution in the Brazilian military academy. And what he defined was there's this distinction between what is civilian and what is military life. And he qualitatively analyzes what are these differences. And so within that, there's a hierarchy. The military tends to see themselves as better than the civilians. the military tends to see themselves as prior to the idea of Brazil as a whole. So as if they were the guiding agents of the Brazilian society. So what should the Brazilian society aspire to be? Should be a militarized society. So talking to Alex, your question about what a future military government or occupied by the military in a whole, the promise, I don't see it as being of equality in a sense of or inclusion into military careers or so on, but a promise of a militarized society in general, which is a society based on hierarchy as well. Which is this idea of hierarchy and the idea of discipline are two other concepts that come together with this idea of the distinction between what is military and what is civilian. So I believe that this idea of militarization is an idea within government, is an idea that seems to propel a more militarized construction of society as well. And what is maybe scary about this is that since there's a situation of precarity, people seem to abide to that. Saying, yeah, okay, so that's not working. Maybe this might be an answer. So yeah, I tend to be perhaps a bit not very positive about this.